Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a place where you gave everything, your love, your attention, your time, until you were running on empty? You gave without hesitation, without boundaries, hoping that if you just loved hard enough, stayed patient long enough, or sacrificed enough, he would finally see your worth. But here's the truth. People don't value what they don't earn, and they don't crave what's constantly handed to them on a silver platter. When you keep giving to someone who isn't meeting you halfway, what you're really doing is teaching them that your energy is infinite and your love is free, even when it comes at the cost of your peace. And the more you give to someone who is emotionally unavailable or complacent, the more you become invisible to them, not because you're not valuable, but because you've made it too easy for them to take you for granted. But the game changes the moment you stop, the moment you pull your energy back, the moment you stop pouring into someone who won't even lift a cup. Everything shifts. That's the moment he starts to feel the loss, the void, the silence. That's when he begins to need what he once overlooked, and that's the moment you rise. When you give without boundaries, you unintentionally send the message that your time, love, and energy come without cost. At first, it feels empowering. You're nurturing, showing up, and offering your heart freely. But over time, this constant giving, especially when it isn't reciprocated, starts to chip away at your value in the eyes of the other person. You see, human nature has a strange response to things that are always available. We begin to assume they'll always be there, and when something is always there, it stops feeling rare, it stops feeling special. It becomes background noise. The same thing happens in relationships. When you're always the one initiating, always offering support, always saying yes, even when you're exhausted or unheard, your giving stops being a gift and starts being expected. What once was an expression of love becomes routine, assumed, and tragically unappreciated. Now, that doesn't mean your kindness was wrong. It means it wasn't being met with the same energy, and without balance, even the purest giving becomes draining. When someone receives without having to earn or reciprocate, their sense of effort decreases. They stop reaching out. They stop checking in. They may not even realize they're doing it, but subconsciously, they start to rely on the idea that you'll always be there, giving, fixing, supporting, regardless of how they show up. That's the danger zone. That's the moment where the scale tips, and your value is no longer felt because your presence is no longer earned. The hard truth is that value increases when effort is required, when something isn't guaranteed, when it demands awareness, presence, and appreciation. It becomes precious. And that's why giving without boundaries is so dangerous. It sends the signal that no matter what happens, you'll keep showing up. You'll keep carrying the emotional weight, solving the problems, initiating the connection. You become the emotional engine of the relationship, and eventually that engine burns out. Not only do you feel empty, but the other person stops seeing your worth because they've stopped having to earn it. The shift begins when you recognize that your energy is not infinite, and it's not free. It's valuable, rare, and sacred. You're not meant to constantly pour into someone who leaves your cup empty. You're not meant to be the only one stretching, bending, and giving. Love is not about sacrifice to the point of self-abandonment. It's about balance. It's about mutual growth. And when that balance is missing, your giving becomes a silent trap. A beautiful gesture turned into a slow erosion of your self-worth. That's why choosing to pull back isn't selfish, it's powerful. Because when you stop giving endlessly, not only do you protect your energy, you force others to stop taking you for granted. You remind them that your presence is a privilege, and only those who value it will be allowed to keep receiving it. When your presence is constant, it's easy to be overlooked. It's human nature. People begin to filter out what they believe will always be there. Think about a song you once loved. You played it over and over until eventually it faded into the background. That's what happens in relationships when your emotional availability is on full display all the time without pause. Your love, your support, your efforts, they begin to blend into the everyday noise. They lose their edge. They lose their impact. And you start feeling invisible in a place where you once gave your all. But the moment you stop showing up the way you used to, the moment you stop texting first, stop offering help, stop pouring out emotional energy to someone who no longer responds with the same depth, That's the moment your silence becomes louder than any conversation you ever had. People don't realize what they have until the energy shifts. You used to be a source of certainty. You used to be the one who held things together, who checked in, who filled the silence with warmth. So when you remove that energy, when you go quiet, it creates a vacuum. That absence, it speaks volumes. It makes the other person pause and notice the silence. It forces them to ask what changed, and more importantly, why does it feel different without her presence? That is the power of pulling back, not to manipulate but to reveal. Your absence highlights what they had and didn't value. It forces them to reflect on what they no longer have easy access to. Most people don't respond to words. They respond to impact. You can tell someone you feel unseen 100 times and nothing changes, but go silent, pull back that emotional investment, and suddenly the absence of your energy makes more noise than your voice ever could. It gets their attention, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because your energy finally has space to be noticed. The love you gave so freely becomes something they remember. The comfort you brought becomes something they crave. The warmth they overlooked becomes a cold they can't ignore, and that's the shift. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, its absence becomes magnetic. This isn't about punishing someone with distance. It's about honoring yourself enough to create it. It's about allowing the other person to feel the weight of what they lost when they stopped appreciating what they had. When you stop being the emotional safety net, you create the space for them to experience discomfort. And discomfort leads to awareness. Sometimes the only way someone realizes your worth is when you stop being available, when you stop giving, and when you stop chasing connection. In that stillness, your absence will say what your words never could. And that's when he starts to worry, not because you're gone, but because for the first time he realizes what your presence truly meant. Need doesn't come from constant availability. It's born from the sudden absence of what once felt secure. When you give endlessly, when you're always emotionally accessible, checking in, being supportive, offering affection, there's no scarcity, there's no pause, there's no space to appreciate what's being received. You've become the constant hum in the background of someone's life, comforting, reliable, predictable, but the very nature of need is rooted in loss or lack. When something is always there, it's not needed. It's expected. And what is expected is often undervalued. That's why the shift happens the moment you stop giving, the moment you pull back from overextending yourself, from doing more than your share, from always showing up first. That's when the awareness kicks in. He didn't need your attention when it was flooding his phone. He didn't need your reassurances when they were available like clockwork. But when the stream dries up, when the late night check-ins vanish, when the small acts of love you used to give without being asked suddenly stop, he notices. And not just notices, he feels it. The silence becomes deafening. The absence becomes a mirror, showing him what he had, what he ignored, and what he might now be losing. This isn't about manipulation. It's about the emotional law of value. What is always there loses its impact. What disappears suddenly becomes essential. The irony is that he starts needing you not when you were giving your all, but when you stopped. Not when you chased connection, but when you chose stillness. And that need comes from the realization that something meaningful is missing. Your warmth, your attention, your depth. It stirs discomfort. It stirs regret, and that discomfort forces a choice. Either he steps up and re-engages from a place of awareness, or he continues to drift, haunted by what he once had but didn't cherish. Need is tied to effort. When you stop making the effort for someone who never matched your energy, you stop feeding the illusion that they don't need to try. You remove the cushion. You stop absorbing all the emotional labor. And in that vacuum, one of two things happen. Either he rises to meet you, or he falls silent, revealing everything you needed to know all along. But either way, you win, because you're no longer sacrificing yourself for crumbs. You're no longer stuck in a cycle of overgiving, and you're no longer allowing someone to consume your energy without appreciating the cost. So yes, he starts needing you when you stop giving, not because you became less, but because you finally made him feel what it's like to live without your presence, and that contrast, that sudden lack. That's what awakens the need, not your words, not your promises, not your sacrifices, but the stillness, the pause, the space where you used to be. That's when he begins to realize he had something rare. And now, it's not guaranteed. When you constantly give, you may not realize it, but you're also teaching someone how to treat you. You're setting the standard. Every time you sacrifice your own needs to meet theirs, every time you show up when they don't, every time you pour love into a cup that never pours back into yours, you're training them to believe that this is normal, that this is just who you are, that this is what love looks like, and while your intentions are pure, the result is often painful. Over time, they stop seeing your efforts as valuable and begin to see them as expected. What once was a gift now feels like an obligation in their eyes. Your love becomes routine, your giving becomes background noise, and the worst part, you begin to forget your own worth in the process because you're constantly measuring it through what you provide rather than who you are. Now, the moment you shift that dynamic, when you say no more, everything begins to change. You stop teaching them to expect everything and start teaching them to appreciate anything. That's a powerful transition. It's uncomfortable, yes. It may feel foreign, even selfish at first. But what it really is necessary because in every relationship there's a balance of energy. When one person is always giving, the relationship becomes one-sided. But when that giving stops, when the flow halts, suddenly the imbalance is exposed. It becomes clear who was carrying the weight, who was doing the emotional lifting, who was showing up even when they were tired, hurt, or overlooked. The beauty in stopping is that it forces a reevaluation. The person on the other side has to confront their own behavior. They have to ask themselves, did I ever truly reciprocate? Did I ever value what was being given? Did I contribute, or did I just take? Those are questions they likely never asked themselves before, because they didn't have to. Your constant giving shielded them from having to face the reality of their role in the dynamic. But when you stop, when you remove the safety net, when you let silence speak louder than sacrifice, they're forced to sit in their own reflection, and often that's when realization, and even regret, starts to creep in. But more importantly, this shift teaches you something too. You begin to realize how much of yourself you are giving away to be seen, loved, or chosen. And you start to understand that your value isn't measured by what you do for others, it's measured by how much you honor yourself. This isn't about punishing anyone, it's about reclaiming your identity outside of being the giver. It's about reminding both them and yourself that your love is powerful, and it's not something to be taken lightly. You stop teaching them to expect everything, and you start teaching them that your presence is a privilege, not a promise. When you stop giving, something else begins to surface, clarity. You begin to see the truth of the relationship, stripped of the distractions your constant efforts created. When you were doing everything, checking in, making plans, offering comfort, it was easy to overlook what wasn't being returned. But the moment you pause, the imbalance becomes undeniable. Who reaches out when you don't? Who shows up without being prompted, who values your space when it's no longer filled with endless effort. These are the answers that only silence can bring. You start to see not through the lens of hope or potential, but through behavior. And behavior never lies. This space gives you the power to observe who was actually there and who was just enjoying the ride. It also helps you understand your own patterns, where you overreached, where you ignored your own boundaries, where you gave out of fear rather than love. And here's what makes this so powerful. Once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. That awareness begins to shape a new standard within you. You start building boundaries not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. You stop trying to prove your worth and instead start protecting your peace. You no longer offer all of yourself to someone who hasn't even shown up with half. And the moment you do this, something surprising happens. Your value begins to rise, not because you changed who you are, but because you finally stopped giving your energy to someone who wasn't reciprocating it. You no longer allow them to live in the comfort of your giving while offering nothing in return. That absence creates tension, it creates desire, and suddenly your silence becomes a mirror they can't avoid. They see their own lack of effort reflected in what's missing. They feel the cold where there used to be warmth, and for the first time, they begin to realize the real cost of your presence. But what's even more important than what they realize is what you realize. You start to understand that you were never meant to chase love, to earn attention, or to shrink yourself for connection. You are meant to receive as much as you give. You are meant to be in spaces where your love is met, your energy is matched, and your presence is respected. And you no longer feel guilty for withdrawing from anything less than that. So yes, when you stop giving, he starts needing, but not because you've become less loving. It's because you've become more discerning. You've stopped being available for inconsistency. You've stopped rewarding complacency. And now the game has changed, not because you wanted him to chase, but because you chose to rise. And in that rise, your absence starts to speak the truth your words never could. When you stop giving, you also begin to shift the emotional power in the relationship, and that shift changes everything, because up until now, you were the emotional anchor. You were the one holding it all together, the one creating connection, the one showing up with loyalty, affection, and consistency. But when that energy is no longer on tap, it leaves a space, a gap that the other person can't ignore. This is when he starts to feel something he hasn't felt in a long time, uncertainty, and that uncertainty triggers worry. Worry about where you went, worry about what you're thinking, worry about who now holds your attention. It's in that silence that he begins to recognize the gravity of what he's losing. Men don't usually react to pressure, demands, or ultimatums. They react to emotional shifts. They may not always process feelings the way you do, but they feel absence. They feel detachment. They feel the space where your love used to exist, and it hits them in ways they don't expect. When you were always there, he had no reason to worry. You were the constant. He could fall back, disappear, neglect effort, because you were still showing up. But when you take a step back, you create a tension he hasn't felt before. And now he starts thinking, he starts noticing, he starts fearing what he once took for granted may be gone for good. This fear isn't just about losing you, it's about losing control. Because when you were always giving, he held the comfort of knowing your love was guaranteed. But when you shift your focus inward, when you stop pouring into someone who isn't meeting you halfway, he's left with the unknown. And that unknown creates anxiety, it creates doubt. He begins to worry about who you're becoming without him. And that worry isn't rooted in ego alone. It's rooted in the recognition that he never truly matched your depth, and now he might not get the chance. But here's where the real power lies. You didn't force this shift. You didn't chase, beg, or plead. You simply stopped giving. You redirected your energy. You chose stillness over sacrifice. And in doing so, you gave him the opportunity to experience the space he created through his own inaction. You let the silence speak. You let your absence teach him what your presence once provided. He starts needing you when you no longer make yourself available by default. He starts worrying when your love is no longer his safety net. And in that quiet, uncertain space, he sees you more clearly than he ever did before, not because you shouted, not because you demanded, but because you stopped, and in that stop, everything changed. The truth is, we teach people how to treat us not through our words, but through our patterns. When you're always available, always giving, always there, no matter how well intentioned, you end up creating a comfort zone for someone who hasn't earned it. And in that comfort zone, your presence becomes expected, your efforts become routine, and your value becomes unnoticed. But the moment you stop, when you shift the energy, when you reclaim your time and attention, that's when awareness is born. That's when they begin to feel the void, the silence, the weight of your absence. In that space where your giving used to be, something remarkable begins to happen. They finally confront the emotional reality you've been carrying alone. The weight you bore quietly, the consistency they never matched. Your withdrawal is not punishment, it's clarity. It forces reflection. It invites them to sit with the truth that love is not a right to be assumed, it's a gift to be earned. And when that gift disappears even for a moment, the mind starts racing, the heart starts stirring, and the soul begins to feel the ache of what was lost. But this shift isn't about making them suffer. It's about bringing balance back into the dynamic. You can no longer give endlessly to someone who gives you fragments. You can no longer offer devotion where there's only convenience. This is the moment where you rise, where you recognize that your love is powerful, rare, and sacred, and it deserves to be met with the same energy. You don't have to become cold or bitter. You just have to become unavailable to anyone who cannot meet you with real, consistent effort. What happens next is not up to you, and that's the point. Either they step up, having felt the shock of losing your attention, or they remain where they are, and you've already freed yourself from the cycle. Either way, you win, because the moment you stopped giving, you reclaimed your dignity. You stopped chasing validation and started attracting respect. You stopped filling gaps that weren't yours to fix. You became whole in yourself, and that is when true attraction is born. So let this be your reminder: you don't have to give endlessly to be loved. The right person will never need to be convinced of your value. They will feel it, they will see it, and they will rise to match it. But until then, protect your energy like the treasure it is, because when you stop giving, not only does he start needing you, you start remembering just how powerful, magnetic, and worthy you truly are. And that is the greatest shift of all. Thank you for sharing this moment with me today. If you've made it this far, it means you're ready for a shift. Not just in your relationship, but in yourself, worth, your boundaries, and the way you love. Remember, your giving heart is beautiful, but it should never come at the cost of your peace, your energy, or your identity. My hope is that today's message reminded you of your power, that it lit a spark inside you to stop pouring into places that leave you empty, that it gave you the courage to pull your energy back, not to hurt anyone, but to finally honor yourself. Because when you stop giving to those who don't value it, you begin giving back to the one who needs it most, you. I want to thank you not just for listening, but for being brave enough to grow. Transformation doesn't come from comfort. It comes from truth, and the truth is, you are worthy of reciprocal love, mutual effort, and deep emotional respect. Don't settle for anything less. Keep showing up for yourself, keep protecting your energy, and never forget, when you shift your focus inward, the right people will feel that shift, and the ones who truly value you, they won't let you walk away without realizing what they stand to lose. Take care of yourself, be kind to your heart, and as always, thank you for being here. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never stop choosing you. Goodbye for now.